Good morning, everyone. We're wrapping up our genetics unit. This is going to be a lot of review with a couple newer concepts in between. We're going to be talking about genetics and heredity, meaning the passing on of those traits. Now, before we get started, please remember, genetics is a way of studying animals and plants and their offspring. And in that connection with kind of like the genes and how we get those traits. So like XX versus XY chromosomes. This can include everything from eye color, hair color, height, your body build, blood type, even part of your intelligence, your gender. And when I say gender, I'm meaning like biological guys. So XX, XY, not worrying about all the other stuff. But all these things are really going to be determined by those genes and that information that's coded into your body. Now, heredity is going to be characteristics that a child receives from both mom and dad. So if mom and dad carry both a dominant and a recessive trait, remember, the child can either be dominant recessive, or recessive, and that all has to do with that genetics and how we pass on traits. Now remember, in our cells, we are going to have, remember, a cell is that basic unit of life. In an adult, you have over 10 trillion. And in that cell, you're going to have that cytoplasm, that's that free-floating part. And then inside there, you're going to have that nucleus, which is pretty much the brain, and it controls all the parts of that body. And then inside that nucleus, you have your chromosomes. You have 46 chromosomes in the nucleus, and those chromosomes consist of those genes, which are pretty much banded together. Think of like it as our DNA. Remember, that's that helix structure that has like the T, A, and our G, C, and that's pretty much how that happens, is that information is coding for you and all of your traits. So how many chromosomes are there in each cell? Fun fact, there's 46 chromosomes, or 23 pairs. When we say 23 pairs, that means you have 23 from mom and 23 from dad. Together, that makes 46 in you. There are some like exceptions that can be chromosomal anomalies. So if you ever see like a picture like this where they like have something circled, a lot of times that's because there's a chromosomal anomaly where something didn't code correctly. So how many chromosomes are in reproductive cells? So in our germ cells, that's what they're referred to as, you have 23 chromosomes. Okay, so in our mommy cell, 23, and our daddy cell, 23 cells. Together that makes a U cell. So 46 total, 23 in our reproductive cells, because everybody donates half to make you. Now this leads to mitosis. Mitosis is how the cell divides. It's going to copy DNA, it's then going to split, and then new cells are going to be forming, and it's going to have that normal number of chromosomes. So this is when like Miss Hudson stubs her toe and she goes, my toe, right? So mitosis is when you have an injury and you need to replace those cells. Now, cell division also occurs, more importantly, in the process of meiosis. And this is where you're going to create half sets of chromosomes. So for women, you're going to produce 23. For men, you're going to produce 23. So that's our XX versus our XY. And then together, when those cells are in the process of reproduction, they produce a cell with the 46 chromosomes. So your little baby cell. Hopefully that's all familiar. Now this gets into our, remember, female sex cells are XX. Male sex cells are going to be XY. From there, they form a baby girl, which could be XX, or a baby boy, which is XY. So this is all just in relation to our chromosomes. Now remember, we talked a little bit of genetics, how there can be different anomalies that occur in females versus males, and this has to do with just those chromosomes and how those chromosomes function. Now, conception is when you take that egg and you take a sperm, so you take the mommy cell and the daddy cell to make a baby cell. Okay. If you have any questions about that, I'm sorry, you have to wait until 7th grade, or you can ask your parents. Now, gender is going to be, please, again, gender is XY versus XX, is going to be determined by the father. Because remember, the mom only has 2 X's to give. The dad has an X and a Y. So dad either gives the trait to make a baby girl or a Y to make a baby boy. This is just a little joke for my little history buffs, sorry. Now, quick little review. Remember, a dominant gene, Oh, I don't know why that says dominate. I'm sorry. It's going to be more powerful, and so that's a trait that's going to be seen. Versus our recessive gene is going to hide in the background unless you have two recessives. If you have two recessive, then you're going to see that recessive trait. Otherwise, the dominant is going to hide that recessive. Now, remember, a carrier has a recessive gene that's not visible. So if you are carrying something, it could be something good, could be something bad, right? If you carry something, that thing's hidden, but you can still pass on that trait, right? So like Miss Hudson has blue eyes, Mr. Hudson has brown eyes. If Mr. Hudson and Miss Hudson had a baby, it's likely that Mr. Hudson, his dad has blue eyes, so he's a carrier of that blue trait. So we could either have a blue-eyed baby or a brown-eyed baby. Now, additionally, there's certain genes that are going to be linked to specific chromosomes. And as a result, sorry, gentlemen, red-green color blindness is also linked to men. And so, for example, Miss Hudson's dad is red-green colorblind. Miss Hudson's mom is not. Now, Miss Hudson's mom and dad had babies, so that means that my brothers had the potential of being colorblind simply because dad gave the trait. But because we had mom, right, that trait is hidden. They still have the potential of that passing on to an offspring, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen because it's recessive. So years down the line, it may occur again when they have babies and their babies have babies, etc. But overall, there's certain traits that are primarily going to be found in just males or just females based on how it's expressed on those genes. Now remember, if we have a trait like capital B, which is dominant for our brown eyes, and lowercase b for our blue eyes, it's going to determine what traits we see versus our homozygous versus our heterozygous. So if you're homozygous dominant, you're going to see brown eyes. If you're homozygous recessive, you're going to see blue eyes. And if you're heterozygous, you're going to see brown eyes because that blue eye gene is hidden. Now, this does kind of lead us into our multiple births. So our twins. Multiple births refers to more than two. It could be identical, fraternal, maybe even both. Okay, I'm sorry, there's crazy cases where people will have like 8 babies. Oh, it's terrifying. Can't imagine giving birth to that many. Wow. You also have a kind of like crazy situations referring to conjoined twins. Yes, this does happen. And what happens with that is when a ovum splits, it doesn't separate completely. And so as a result, the baby starts to form kind of attached to each other. Now, depending on where that attachment is, pretty much determines if a child can grow up to full term. The picture right here are twins that are, to this day, they're still alive. They are living happily and they are conjoined. But because of where they are conjoined, they can't be separated because they share some very important organs. Sometimes doctors will see if like they're conjoined in a place that can be separated, if they can separate them, but this can lead to death. And so that's why a lot of times doctors don't want to do that unless they're really confident that the organs and important vital stuff is separate. Now this refers to our zygote. Our zygote is a cell that is formed when it's fertilized. So pretty much like the baby is starting to form. I'm so sorry, my little picture of me is blocking it, but that's what that looks like. Now monozygotic refers to our identical twins. So we're gonna have one egg, one sperm, and those identical twins split. And so as a result, they're going to have the same exact genetic information, meaning that they're either going to be XX, XX, or XY, XY. And all that information is going to be the same. Now, please keep in mind your DNA can slowly change over time. So as time progresses, they might have slight changes in their DNA. But overall, they're pretty much the same genetic information. And dizygotic is fraternal twins, meaning that they're going to not have the same exact genetic information. You have 2 separate eggs and 2 separate sperm that fertilize those separate ones. It's not that split, they are separate when they're dizygotic. Now, what 4 factors can contribute to having twins? Having a family history of twins actually increases the chances of you having twins. Fun fact. Additionally, if you are having any kind of hormonal treatment, sometimes that can increase the number of eggs that are released, and as a result, more can be fertilized. Additionally, fertility drugs. There are medications people try to take to try to increase the chance of getting pregnant, and that can lead to that. Additionally, weirdly enough, having a child between the age of 32 and 36 can increase the chance of having twins. Isn't that wild? Now, with that in mind, remember you have sex-linked conditions, or sometimes it's going to be like known as defects. Um, Please keep in mind we don't really like to use that word as much anymore, but pretty much what happens is that there's certain traits that are going to be linked to different things. Miss Hudson has had like genetic testing, and that genetic testing pretty much says whether or not you're a carrier of things. For Miss Hudson, we found out that I am a carrier of something called an SMN1, which pretty much means that I have the potential of giving a chromosomal abnormality to an offspring. That pretty much means that they would have spinal issues, which decreases their chance of survival. That was a really hard thing for Miss Hudson to hear. It is a recessive trait. So when we did genetic testing for Mr. Hudson, we found that he didn't carry it. So that means that if we had children, those children would not have that medical condition. However, they could be carriers of it. Okay, and so that kind of thing can happen a lot. There are tons of different genetic kind of things that can occur. A lot of times they're going to be recessive. And so if you get that recessive with the recessive, it'll show that trait. But if you have a dominant trait hiding it, you're okay. Now that one's a little bit of an emotional one for me to talk about because it was a little bit scary to find that out because it takes a while to get the genetic results back. If you or your parents are going through anything like that, please talk to me. I totally get it. Now, a syndrome is what we kind of associate with signs and symptoms that occur with a specific condition. So that's why, like, if people have heard of Down syndrome, that's going to be linked to those chromosomes. And we find that there's certain patterns that we see in the symptoms of individuals who have this condition. A congenital malformation is a condition that is present at birth. So when a baby comes out of the womb, they have this condition. Ms. Hudson has had friends who had a baby with a severe heart congenital malformation. Unfortunately, that child did not make it. Sometimes there are ways that they can do treatment for babies that are still in the womb or like immediately upon birth to treat different congenital malformations. But depending on the severity and the organ, it can significantly affect life expectancy. And so this one can be a really hard one to talk about. There are also multifactorial defects, and so that's when like our genes interact with each other as well as in the environmental factors and lead to things. Think of it as cancer. There are certain forms of cancer that occur simply because of environmental factors, and this can be a really scary thing to talk about. Miss Hudson has so many sad experiences, but Miss Hudson's dad has had cancer. In fact, he's had 4 different forms of cancer, and that a lot of times has to do with like one, how his genes interacted with the environment, as well as when he was in the military, some of the things that he was exposed to. Now this leads us to chromosomal errors. Chromosomal errors are kind of like when that cell is being fertilized. Sometimes things can happen where you have like an additional sperm trying to fertilize, and this can lead to kind of like different types of malformations, or like kind of like sometimes the egg just isn't viable. Sometimes it's just kind of something small, but sometimes it is something bigger. We've previously talked about a couple like the syndromes that can occur, but this is kind of what we're talking about, where chromosomal errors can occur. A lot of times you're fine. Other times it's not exactly the best long-term effects for that child. Now, back to fun things, because we talked a little bit of sad and scary things. And so, fun fact, there are like increased chances of having multiple pregnancies or twins. So if you are white, you have a 1 in 93 chance of having a twin, versus blacks, you have a 1 in 73 chance. Isn't that wild? And triplets are a 1 in 10,000 chance, whereas quadruplets are a 1 in 620,000 chance. Now, please keep in mind, sometimes these numbers are changing based on how much people are having children. Our fertility rates have gone down in the United States, and so the chances of having twins are a little bit lower now. But overall, it's kind of like rare chances to have a higher number of children. Well, I hope that was kind of a fun facts for you today. I hope you guys have a great day. Take care.